Welcome to the Deep Dive. Tomorrow, July 7th. It's shaping up to be a potentially decisive day in Middle East diplomacy. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading to Washington, D.C. for, well, what everyone is calling a high-stakes summit with U.S. President Joe Biden.
That's right. High stakes feels almost like an understatement here.
It really does. We're right on the cusp of an event that could, profoundly reshape things in the region. So today, we're diving deep into exactly what's on the line. Okay, let's try and unpack this. Our mission here, as always, is to cut through all the noise, the constant churn of headlines. We take the raw intelligence, the reports, official statements, expert notes we've gathered, and pull out those really crucial bits of knowledge, those insights.
The goal being to make sure you're not just following the news, but really well informed.
Exactly. Equipped with maybe some surprising facts. Definitely the context you need to truly grasp the significance of this meeting. Now, the core focus, and the White House confirmed this, is a Gaza ceasefire deal.
But it's so much more complicated than just that one issue, isn't it? Our sources, this whole stack of recent reports and notes, they paint a much, much bigger picture.
They certainly do.
What's really fascinating here, I think, is how this isn't just another diplomatic sit-down. It feels more like a high-stakes strategic chess match.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Our sources are indicating both leaders, Biden and Netanyahu, are facing these immense converging pressure points. It makes this way more than just a routine exchange.
So much is riding on this.
Their political futures, for one, and arguably the whole future trajectory of the region. It all seems to hinge on whether they can bridge what looks like an unprecedented gap between, global demands for peace and their very different, very firm domestic red lines.
So we're going to try and explore all those intricate layers of complexity. We want you, the listener, to really consider the multiple dimensions at play here, beyond just the immediate headlines. That's a critical framing to start with. So let's begin by setting the stage properly. Why this meeting exactly now? Why has tomorrow, July 7th, become this focal point?
Well, diving into the reports, it becomes abundantly clear pretty quickly. This visit lands at a uniquely pivotal moment in this months-long Israel-Hamas conflict.
And it has been months long, hasn't it? Not just a brief flare-up.
Exactly. We're not talking about a short escalation. This conflict has dragged on for a long, brutal time, leading to consequences on a scale that's, frankly, hard to imagine.
Devastating consequences.
Right. And the sheer protracted duration of the fighting, it's intensified global pressure to an almost unbearable degree. It's pushing everyone involved, and really the international community as a whole, towards this urgent, undeniable need for some kind of resolution.
And our sources, they really lay bare that human cost. It's described not just as, a political struggle, but a genuine humanitarian catastrophe. How does that overwhelming human element shape the diplomatic urgency we're seeing? Does it, impose a unique kind of pressure?
Oh, absolutely it does. The humanitarian crisis isn't just some backdrop noise. Our sources make it clear it's a significant, almost unbearable source of pressure that fundamentally shifts the diplomatic calculations.
It has to.
We're talking about the tragic loss of tens of thousands of lives and millions, literally millions of people forced from their homes, facing just unimaginable hardship, widespread starvation, critical shortages of, everything. Basic necessities.
It's grim.
It is. And this isn't just a statistic, right? It's the raw, tragic reality that's actively fueling this diplomatic urgency. The intelligence we've seen emphasizes that global pressure is mounting hard for both sides to halt the fighting and reach a lasting resolution.
And it's truly global pressure.
It seems so. Not just a few key players whispering behind the scenes. It's this resounding, sustained demand from international organizations, allied nations, public sentiment across continents. This overwhelming human cost. It's undeniably the primary driving force behind this desperate push for some kind of breakthrough in these talks. It places a moral weight on both leaders that, frankly, they just can't ignore.
So when you think about that sheer scale of impact, the incredible loss of life, the displacement, the looming threat of famine, you really start to understand why the whole world seems to be holding its breath for this meeting. But, okay, beyond the obvious humanitarian imperative, what specifically makes this moment pivotal? Our sources keep using that exact word.
Yeah, they do. And our analysis suggests it's not just the accumulated pressure, though that's huge. It seems uniquely pivotal because it coincides with a specific kind of fatigue setting across all parties.
Fatigue.
Yeah, like a weariness so profound, it's forcing people to consider options that might have been unthinkable just months ago. We're seeing this convergence of internal political vulnerabilities for both leaders.
Right, we'll get into that.
A growing impatience from key international allies who are facing their own domestic pressures, and this very real escalating risk of the whole thing spiraling into a regional conflict that hangs over everyone's head like a sword.
So it's not just reactive.
No, this meeting isn't just a reaction to the latest events. It's being framed, quite deliberately it seems, as a crucial new diplomatic opening. A recognition, perhaps, that the old ways, the old approaches, are just not sustainable anymore.
And the timing. Any other factors?
Well, the specific timing relative to other shifting regional dynamics, the alliances, the security concerns elsewhere in the Middle East, that also adds to its weight. The reports we have explicitly state this is more than just a photo op.
Definitely not just for show.
No. It's positioned as a working summit where concrete, verifiable outcomes are desperately needed. And both leaders know, acutely aware of the weight of expectation, that they really can't afford to leave Washington empty-handed. The pressure is immense.
That's a crucial distinction then. Not about optics. It's about genuine, hard-nosed negotiation.
Yeah.
Trying to stop the immediate fighting, yes, but also maybe lay some groundwork for what comes next.
Exactly.
So with that backdrop of immense global urgency, let's now peel back the layers. What's actually on the table? What are the specific concessions, the demands that will determine if Prime Minister Netanyahu can even begin to navigate this, treacherous path? The White House has been pretty upfront about the main discussion points.
They have, surprisingly so perhaps. They've officially outlined the key topics, which gives us a clear, structured agenda. This isn't going to be some vague chat or a broad exchange of views. There are very specific, pressing goals they're expected to tackle head-on.
Okay, so point one, the most immediate.
Yeah.
A multi-phase ceasefire plan. Our sources really emphasize that multi-phase aspect. What does that imply exactly? It sounds, a lot more complex than just hitting pause.
You're right. It's far from a simple on-off switch. Multi-phase implies a meticulously structured, gradual, sort of incremental approach, not an immediate single-step halt to everything.
Why that approach?
Well, it's often used in these really complex, deeply entrenched conflicts because it allows for some essential trust building, hopefully. It allows for verification mechanisms to be put in place, and it gives some ability to adapt as things progress, maybe making it slightly more palatable for sides that deeply mistrust each other.
Makes sense. So what might those phases look like based on our sources?
Our sources talk about discussions around a phased approach that could start with, say, an initial, maybe 72-hour humanitarian pause.
Okay, sure.
Very short. Phase 1, specifically for aid delivery, maybe some verification, and potentially the initial release of a very limited number of hostages, perhaps women, children, the elderly first. Then, if that holds, if it's successful, it could lead to a longer cessation, maybe weeks, maybe even months. But that would likely be contingent on releasing more hostages and implementing specific agreed-upon security protocols, maybe at the borders.
The devil's in the details there, isn't it?
Absolutely. The technical hurdle is defining clear, verifiable metrics for compliance at each stage that both sides, despite their profound mistrust, can actually agree on and live with. It's essentially a roadmap, like President Biden's push for a U.S.-backed roadmap suggests.
Step by step.
Designed to de-escalate step by step, allowing for flexibility, adjustments as progress is made or isn't made. So yeah, for you, the listener, understanding this multi-phase idea is key. It points to a nuanced, sequential approach, not just flipping a switch on the fighting.
And intricately tied into any ceasefire, often the trigger for it, is the second confirmed point. The release of Israeli hostages. Our sources specify Israeli hostages still held by Hamas.
Absolutely central. The release of these hostages isn't just a critical negotiating point. It carries this immense moral, political, and frankly, emotional weight for Israel and for the international community, too.
It's a huge domestic issue in Israel.
Huge. For Israel, their safe return is often framed as a non-negotiable cornerstone for any deal. It reflects the deep national trauma and the intense public outcry over their continued captivity. Now, historically, in conflicts like this, hostage releases are frequently linked to broader prisoner exchanges.
Right, the release of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel.
Exactly. And that linkage adds another layer of profound complexity. The specific numbers, the identities involved, the political sensitivities around who might be released, these become incredibly difficult bargaining chips.
Any movement on this would be significant.
Monumental. Any significant progress on the hostage front would be hailed as a huge humanitarian and diplomatic breakthrough. It would signal a potential softening of positions, maybe an initial step toward real de-escalation.
Okay, so beyond the immediate fighting and the hostages, the humanitarian crisis looms large. The White House also confirmed discussions on humanitarian aid corridors into Gaza. Our sources paint a truly desperate picture there.
They do, and it's absolutely critical. We've already mentioned the report saying thousands have died, millions are displaced. It paints a stark, almost apocalyptic picture of the situation on the ground in Gaza. Access to essential supplies, food, clean water, vital medicines, fuel corridors. It's not just crucial, it's literally life and death for countless civilians trapped in this.
So what does establishing corridors actually involve?
It means negotiating and then meticulously securing safe passages for these supplies to actually get into Gaza and be distributed effectively, impartially throughout the territory.
Which sounds incredibly difficult in a conflict zone.
It's an enormous challenge, huge logistical hurdles given the ongoing fighting, the sheer destruction of infrastructure, the massive internal displacement of people, and then you have significant political and security sensitivities.
Like who controls the aid?
Exactly. All parties need to agree on how and where the aid flows, who controls its distribution on the ground, and crucially, how to prevent it from being diverted by militant groups. Securing these corridors is essential, not just to alleviate immediate, desperate suffering, but also to prevent things getting even worse, mass starvation, disease outbreaks. The success here is literally measured in lives saved.
And then, the really big one, maybe the hardest part, the future governance of the territory, meaning Gaza. This sounds like the toughest nut to crack, loaded with history and disagreement.
It is, without a doubt, probably the most complex and long-term issue on the agenda. And it's likely to be the subject of some intensely difficult, probably very private, closed-door negotiations. Agreeing on how Gaza is governed after the conflict, it means navigating a minefield. Conflicting interests, deep-rooted historical grievances, profound future security concerns for everyone involved.
What are the possibilities being floated, according to our sources?
Our sources suggest various ideas are being quietly discussed, things ranging from some form of international oversight, maybe a multilateral force, to perhaps a return of the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah-led group that runs parts of the West Bank now, but lost Gaza to Hamas back in 2007.
That would be contentious.
Hugely. Or even maybe a new, locally driven technocratic administration, perhaps backed by regional and international players. But the challenges are just immense. Who provides long-term security? Who manages the colossal reconstruction effort needed? I mean, you're talking about rebuilding an entire society. How do you restore basic services sustainably? How does Gaza become economically viable?
Fundamental questions.
And more fundamentally, how do you set up a governing structure that satisfies Israel's deep security concerns, meets the legitimate aspirations of Palestinians for self-determination, and aligns with the strategic interests of regional and international powers? It's an incredibly tall order.
So connecting this to the bigger picture.
Yeah, if we connect this, future governance isn't just about who holds the levers of power day to day. It's about trying to establish a framework that can genuinely prevent this kind of conflict from happening again and again, that can foster sustainable, lasting peace and stability for the long haul. And that raises the huge question. What kind of structure can actually bring genuine, lasting peace to Gaza? One that addresses both the immediate needs and the profound challenges of long-term stability and reconstruction.
It's daunting. It really is about building something that lasts, not just another temporary fix. And on that front, President Biden himself, our sources say, has taken a very proactive stance. He's pushed hard for a permanent ceasefire, presenting a U.S.-backed roadmap. What more do we know about that roadmap? It mentions political guarantees and security coordination.
The fact that Biden has pushed hard, that phrase itself signals a significant, comprehensive American diplomatic effort. It underlines this isn't just reactive, they're trying to shape the outcome. A permanent ceasefire, as described in the roadmap, implies, well, a full stop to hostilities with no set end date, the ultimate goal being a definitive end to the conflict.
And the roadmap is the how.
Right. The U.S.-backed roadmap provides a structured framework to try and achieve this, integrating immediate de-escalation with longer-term stability plans.
So political guarantees, what might that mean in practice?
When our sources talk about political guarantees, they likely mean assurances from various parties about future political arrangements in Gaza. This could involve things like internationally monitored trust funds for reconstruction, but may be tied to verifiable reforms within the Palestinian Authority. Or it could mean commitments to a broader political process aimed at eventually reviving prospects for a two-state solution. These guarantees are essential to ensure that any security arrangements aren't just seen as open-ended or favoring one side, but are tied to a viable, legitimate political horizon that offers some hope for the future.
And the security coordination. That sounds intricate.
Oh, incredibly intricate. That would involve detailed arrangements for how security is actually maintained in Gaza after the fighting stops. It could mean agreements on strict border controls, demilitarization of certain areas, maybe comprehensive disarmament of militant groups, or even the phased deployment of a reformed, internationally trained Palestinian security force. All of this would require complex, real-time data sharing and robust monitoring systems.
So it's about preventing future attacks.
Exactly. It's about setting up mechanisms to prevent future attacks and ensure regional stability. That's a key Israeli demand, obviously. But it also has to address legitimate Palestinian security and governance needs. This roadmap, it's clearly designed as a comprehensive long-term approach, linking an immediate halt to fighting with durable political and security frameworks. It shows a serious American commitment to finding a lasting solution, something beyond just temporary fixes.
That makes a lot of sense. So the U.S. comes in with a detailed proposal, trying to define an exit strategy. But as you said, Prime Minister Netanyahu faces a totally different, deeply personal challenge. He's caught between these wildly competing demands. It sounds like an incredibly difficult, almost impossible spot for him.
It truly is. And this is where you really see the human element in this kind of high-stakes diplomacy. Our sources highlight that Netanyahu must now balance internal politics with diplomatic urgency. That's not just some political cliche. It's the core, profound conflict he's grappling with as he heads into these talks.
A real high-wire act.
Absolutely. Every single move is going to be scrutinized. The stakes for his immediate political survival, the stability of his coalition government, and yes, his historical legacy. They're immense. His flexibility, or perhaps his lack of it, is largely going to be dictated by these converging pressures.
So let's break that down. On one side, there's his internal political pressure. Our sources say his political base demanding continued military pressure on Hamas. What does that actually mean for his room to maneuver in these negotiations?
This is arguably the single most critical factor shaping his decisions, and it's a direct constraint on his negotiating posture. Netanyahu leads a multi-party coalition government, right? And a significant, very vocal part of his political base, including hardline elements within his coalition partners, they are strong proponents of continued decisive military action against Hamas.
They want Hamas gone.
Completely dismantled. They view sustained military pressure as absolutely essential for Israel's long-term security. So, for Netanyahu, accepting any deal that's seen as too lenient or perceived as leaving Hamas intact and capable of rebuilding, well, that could trigger a severe, possibly existential backlash from these key supporters.
Could his government fall?
It absolutely could. It could directly lead to the collapse of his government, potentially forcing new, unpredictable elections right in the middle of this crisis. His political survival, the stability of his coalition, they're completely tied to how he manages these powerful domestic demands. It leaves him with extremely limited room to maneuver if a deal looks like it compromises on what his base sees as vital security objectives or, a complete victory. He's walking an exceptionally tight domestic political tightrope.
Wow. And then on the other side, he faces his international allies urging restraint. That's such a stark contrast, almost diametrically opposed to the internal pressures.
It really is. The pressure from Israel's international allies, especially the U.S., but also other key Western nations, it stems from a potent mix of factors. There's the growing global outcry over the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza that strains their own diplomatic credibility and public support back home for backing Israel.
Right.
Then there's increasing worry about the potential for wider regional instability if this conflict escalates further, drawing in groups like Hezbollah or maybe even Iran directly.
A much bigger war.
Exactly. So for these allies, continued large-scale military operations, especially ones causing significant civilian casualties, they strain diplomatic ties, create domestic political problems for them, and directly put Israel's international standing and legitimacy at risk globally. They are urgently pushing for a restraint and, critically, for a ceasefire. Not just out of humanitarian concern, though that's real, but also out of profound strategic worry for regional stability, global order, and their own foreign policy goals.
So Netanyahu has to weigh these two impossible things.
He has to weigh keeping these crucial, often indispensable international relationships against his overwhelming domestic political needs, which, as you can imagine, is an almost impossible balancing act. It requires incredible diplomatic and political dexterity.
And for Netanyahu personally, our sources suggest this could reshape his legacy. If a deal is reached or even significantly advanced, it could reshape Netanyahu's legacy. This feels bigger than just his current term.
It absolutely does, and this adds an immense personal weight to these already incredibly high-stakes talks. Benjamin Netanyahu has had an extraordinarily long, very impactful career as prime minister.
Right.
He's defined so much of Israel's modern political landscape, earned himself the nickname King Bibi. This conflict and how he ultimately navigates its resolution will undoubtedly be the defining, culminating chapter of that legacy, no question. If he manages to secure a deal that genuinely brings stability, addresses Israel's deeply held security concerns, and significantly eases the humanitarian crisis and global tensions, well, it could solidify his place as a statesman capable of making incredibly difficult, far-reaching, historically significant decisions in a moment of crisis.
But the flip side.
The flip side, if the conflict just continues to fester, if humanitarian conditions get even worse, or if, God forbid, it escalates into a broader regional war, that could cast a very different, perhaps indelible shadow on his historical standing. So understanding these profound domestic and international forces pulling at him helps you grasp why this negotiation isn't just about policy points. It's deeply personal, it's existential, and it's intensely political for him. The weight of how history will remember him truly rests on what happens next.
It's an almost unimaginable amount of pressure on one person. Okay, so we've talked through the immediate urgent Gaza issues and this intricate, perilous dance Netanyahu has to perform. But our sources also hint at other equally significant discussions happening behind closed doors, things that will shape the region for years, maybe decades, way beyond just Gaza. This is where the long-term strategic game really comes into play, isn't it?
That's exactly right. While the Gaza ceasefire is the main public focus, the most immediate humanitarian and security worry, the reports we've looked at strongly suggest this July 7th meeting will also cover a crucial, intensely sensitive, broader regional agenda.
Less visible stuff.
Much less visible to the public, probably less tied to the daily headlines, but arguably even more important for the long-term stability and the fundamental geopolitical map of the entire Middle East. This is where leaders are planning for the next 5, 10, 20 years out.
And top of that list, a perennial deep concern for both the U.S. and Israel, Iran's expanding influence in the region. How does that fit into these talks right now, given the current Gaza conflict?
Iran's influence is, it's a cornerstone of strategic thinking in both Washington and Jerusalem. It provides this critical, overarching strategic backdrop to almost any discussion about Middle East security. It factors in now because, look, while the Gaza conflict is immediate and devastating, it's always connected to these broader regional power dynamics.
How does Iran exert that influence?
In multiple ways, and seemingly increasingly aggressive ways, through its strong network of proxies and allied non-state actors, think Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria and Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, groups that directly threaten Israeli borders and American interests. Then there's its controversial nuclear program, a constant source of tension and proliferation fears. And it actively fuels regional instability through financial and military support for various militant groups, including Hamas.
So for Israel and the U.S.?
For Israel, Iran is seen as an existential long-term threat, often described as this octopus with tentacles reaching across the region, and Hamas is seen as one of those tentacles. For the U.S., Iran's actions consistently destabilize key strategic interests, oil flows, security of vital allies like Saudi Arabia, the UAE. So even as they're talking about the immediate Gaza crisis, Biden and Netanyahu will undoubtedly be strategizing on how to more effectively contain or counter Iran's influence.
What means?
Could be renewed diplomacy, maybe intensified sanctions, maybe coordinated security and intelligence measures. But our sources suggest that while containing Iran is paramount, the Gaza conflict has kind of paradoxically complicated the strategies. It raises critical questions like, how do you directly counter Iranian proxy support for groups like Hezbollah without triggering a much wider regional war, especially when the current fighting has already inflamed sentiments across the region? It raises the critical question of whether military containment or maybe a renewed diplomatic push on the nuclear file should take precedence, and how their potentially divergent tactical approaches can be aligned. That's a huge background conversation.
Okay, then there's U.S. concerns over Israeli settlement activity. This has always been a point of friction, often bubbling under the surface, but now it's explicitly on the agenda.
It has, and it remains a deeply sensitive, complex issue that frequently strains the otherwise very strong U.S.-Israeli relationship. The sources just state it will be discussed, which tells us it's still a significant, pressing concern for the U.S. government, especially when thinking about any kind of post-Gaza stability plan.
Why is it such a concern for the U.S.?
From the U.S. perspective, continued Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank specifically, building and expanding communities in territory captured in 1967 is often seen as a direct obstacle to the viability of a two-state solution. That's been the long-standing American policy goal. An independent Palestinian state alongside Israel as the ultimate way to resolve the conflict. Settlements, in the U.S. view, complicate the geographic possibility, the contiguity, the potential sovereignty of a future Palestinian state. It just makes a viable two-state outcome harder and harder to achieve.
So what's the ask likely to be?
Our sources suggest the discussions aren't about dismantling existing settlements, that's probably a non-starter, but more about halting new construction and expansion, especially in particularly sensitive areas. This concern highlights a fundamental difference in approach between the two allies on a core aspect of the broader Israeli-Palestinian issue. It'll be a delicate but crucial point behind closed doors, especially as they try to envision any future beyond Gaza.
And finally, the potential geopolitical earthquake, the real game changer that could totally reshape Middle East alliances. Potential Saudi-Israeli normalization efforts.
Yeah.
Our sources say even this will be discussed, despite the current conflict.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting, where the long-term strategic vision truly kicks in. Potential Saudi-Israeli normalization. The implications are just immense for the entire Middle East.
How so?
If it happened, it would be nothing short of a monumental geopolitical shift. It could forge a new axis of power in the region, bringing together two nations that have been historically distant, united against common threats, primarily Iran. Such a deal could fundamentally reshape alliances, redefine regional security frameworks, unlock significant economic opportunities, potentially creating a more integrated, more prosperous Middle East.
A huge win for the U.S. if they could broker it.
A major diplomatic achievement, absolutely, contributing profoundly to regional stability and significantly countering Iranian influence. However,
Gaza conflict.
The ongoing Gaza conflict has undoubtedly complicated these efforts significantly. Before October 7th, normalization talks were reportedly moving along quite briskly. Saudi Arabia was seeking U.S. security guarantees, maybe civil nuclear cooperation, in return for recognizing Israel. But the profound humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the intense public feeling across the Arab and Muslim world, that's made it much harder politically for Saudi Arabia to openly pursue such a deal without very significant concessions from Israel or some kind of lasting resolution to the Palestinian issue.
But it's still on the table.
Our sources suggest that despite these complications, these discussions are still very much on the table. It indicates all three parties, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Israel, still see the immense long-term benefits and are actively searching for a path forward. It might even be, in a kind of twisted way, that the Gaza conflict has actually reprioritized the need for broader regional stability and pushes these efforts back into focus as a necessary long-term solution.
Could they be linked somehow?
Imagine the geopolitical ripple effect if a future Saudi role in helping rebuild Gaza, maybe involving substantial financial backing, were subtly linked to a broader peace dividend that included eventual normalization. It's a potential game changer that goes way beyond the current conflict, promising a recalibration of the entire regional power structure.
It truly is, and it just underscores how interconnected all these issues are. The immediate Gaza crisis is completely linked to these much larger, long-term strategic chess moves. So given all these incredibly complex layers, the ceasefire talks, Netanyahu's intense political pressures, the broader regional stuff with Iran, settlements, normalization, the stakes truly could not be higher. So as informed observers, what should we be watching for most closely in the coming days?
Our deep dive into all this material makes it absolutely clear. The stakes are high. Tens of thousands dead, millions displaced, the risk of regional escalation growing constantly. Failure to make significant, tangible progress in this meeting carries extraordinarily severe consequences.
Like what, specifically?
We're talking about a deepening humanitarian catastrophe, the very real possibility of a wider regional conflict pulling in other, even more formidable players, and significant global diplomatic fallout that could further strain international relations and trust in global leadership.
But on the flip side,
Conversely, if a deal is reached, or even significantly advanced, our sources say it could shift the course of Middle East diplomacy, ease tensions with global powers, and reshape Netanyahu's legacy. This is a moment with profound, lasting implications, not just for the immediate parties, but for global stability and the entire future of the Middle East.
So given those massive stakes, what are the key questions we and you, the listener, should be asking as the news unfolds tomorrow, July 7th, and in the days after? What are the real indicators of success or failure here?
The reports we've reviewed give us 3 critical questions to monitor. They act as pretty good barometers for the outcome. First, will the U.S. pressure Israel into accepting a truce? We know President Biden has pushed hard for a permanent ceasefire, signaling deep commitment. The real question is the nature and the extent of that pressure.
How hard will they push?
Exactly. Will it be mainly diplomatic, rhetorical, relying on persuasion, or will there be more substantial forms of leverage, perhaps implied, maybe even explicitly mentioned, that the U.S. might use to try and sway Israel's decisions? The answer to that will reveal a lot about the strength of the U.S. commitment and its willingness to exert its considerable influence.
Okay, question 1. U.S. pressure. What's the second key question?
The second goes right to the core of Prime Minister Netanyahu's dilemma. Can Netanyahu secure terms that satisfy both his cabinet and the international community? This is that ultimate tightrope walk we talked about, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
To satisfy his hardline cabinet and his political base, Netanyahu needs terms that show continued, decisive pressure on Hamas, that robustly address Israel's security concerns, maybe including that complete dismantling of Hamas's capabilities they demand. But conversely, to satisfy the international community and ease global pressure, the terms need to include significant, sustained humanitarian aid access, a credible path to long-term stability and governance in Gaza, and potentially steps that don't completely kill off the prospects for a viable two-state solution down the road.
Finding a deal that threads that needle.
It's incredibly fun. Finding a deal that threads that needle, appeasing such diverse and often contradictory demands, that's the real measure of success here. It'll require immense diplomatic skill, probably painful compromises, and potentially difficult concessions from all sides.
Okay, and the third crucial question is about the unseen forces, right?
Yeah.
The behind-the-scenes players.
Exactly. What role will Egypt, Qatar, and the UN play behind the scenes? We know these major diplomatic breakthroughs rarely happen just between the main players in the room.
These others are essential.
Absolutely crucial. Egypt, Qatar, the UN, they've historically played, and continue to play, vital roles as intermediaries, facilitators, sometimes even guarantors in these negotiations. Egypt, with its shared border with Gaza and long-standing ties, is often a key mediator. Qatar has been instrumental in past hostage talks and provides significant aid. The UN, through agencies like UNRWA and OCA, is indispensable on the ground with humanitarian aid and advocating for international law.
So even if they're not in the room with Biden and Netanyahu,
their ongoing efforts behind the scenes will be vital, shaping the contours of any potential deal, facilitating critical back-channel communication, maybe even helping to monitor and enforce agreements later on. Their continued involvement is a really critical barometer of whether any outcome from these talks is actually feasible and sustainable in the long run.
So for you, the listener, those are the critical questions to keep in your mind as events unfold tomorrow and in the coming days. They're the real indicators of success or stalemate, the threads that can help you navigate the intricate tapestry of these high-stakes talks. As our sources state, with real gravity, this meeting could be the turning point the world has been waiting for. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. What an extraordinary, truly pivotal moment in global diplomacy we've been discussing. We've meticulously unpacked the immediate, urgent focus, that multi-phase ceasefire, the moral and political weight of hostage release, the critical need for humanitarian aid into Gaza. We've also thoroughly explored the incredibly complex long-term challenge of Gaza's future governance. And those broader, equally significant regional discussions, Iran's influence, U.S. concerns over settlements, and a potentially transformative Saudi-Israeli normalization.
And we highlighted the immense internal and external pressures weighing so heavily on Prime Minister Netanyahu, underscoring the incredibly high stakes involved for everyone, the humanitarian cost, the risk of regional war, and the very course of Middle East diplomacy itself.
Our unwavering aim with this deep dive, as always, was to impartially convey the complexities, the factual points, the profound implications presented in the sources we reviewed. We trust this has allowed you, the listener, to grasp the multifaceted nature of this critical summit without us taking any sides, focusing instead on the verifiable facts as presented and their strategic ramifications.
Exactly, just laying out the information as clearly as possible.
So as we look towards July 7th and the days after, maybe consider not just the immediate headlines coming out of Washington, but also the silent ripple effects this meeting could have across the entire region for decades. Think about the potential impact on everything from security dynamics and economic partnerships to the very fabric of geopolitical alliances. How will history ultimately judge this moment? What will its true, lasting legacy actually be?
It's a lot to think about.
It is. We invite you to keep these intricate layers of information, these hidden complexities and long-term implications in mind as you follow the developments. Hopefully it allows you to go far beyond the surface and truly understand the deep currents at play here.
Thank you for joining us on this vital deep dive into these high-stakes talks that are shaping the future of the Middle East.
Until next time.